Got it. All right.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Schwartz. I know I look a little different this week. Um, it's so good to see all of you. And as you all know, our Rebecca is dealing with some personal stuff. Everything is fine, but she asked Lois and myself, so we are blessed and happy to do this for her as well as all of us. Because why? Because we love you. Lois and I love you. Let us tell you a little bit about what you'll be learning today and about our illustrious presenter, Emily Cutie Pie Howard Meyer is an accomplished Jewish educator, composer, arranger, conductor, teacher, singer, and pianist. She is the owner of our oysongs.com, a Jewish music distribution website, and Composer Girl Publications, a musical publication company. Currently, she is serving as a student rabbi and chaplain intern at the Charles E. Smith Life Communities in Rockville, Maryland, while she is a full-time rabbinical student at the Academy for Jewish Religion in New York. She received a double Bachelor of Music degree in piano performance and theory composition at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley and a Master's of Composition from the Peabody Conservatory of the Johns Hopkins University. An avid teacher, Emily has taught all aspects of music at Eastern Wyoming College, Finger Lakes Community College, and the Omaha Conservatory of Music. She lives in Rockville, Maryland with her husband, Gabe, and her adorable teenage twins, Ella and Owen, and 3 cats. Emily has an active artistic life as well as being a weaver, a knitter, a spinner, a felter, a dyer. My goodness, Emily, a potter, a carpenter, a cake maker, and gluten-free baked goods inventor. We are so honored to have our beautiful Emily provide us with the knowledge of music theory today. So take it away, sweetheart.
Okay, well, I'm looking around and I'm wondering, I think most of you know this stuff already, but we'll go anyway. Maybe I'll teach you something you didn't know. Um, because there's actually a lot of history in here. So, because I feel like whenever I have taught in the past, when I've taught college, especially, my students remember it more when they understand the whys and not just here it is, memorize. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a little bit of the whys and wherefores and what everything needs to be, where it came from. So this is a very basic. We're starting with notes, readings, and all that, but I'm going to give you some history first of things. Okay. So if you are this person, I can sing, play, read a bit of music, but what are you going to teach me? I'm going to talk about the history of notation, which is one of my favorite topics, and how that might help you remember things. Scales, modes, and their relation to nusach and Gregorian chant. I was always a big fan of Gregorian chant because it's very relaxing. And I feel like many years ago, there was a man who came to one of the synagogues where I was working, and he had a book and a CD on linking nusach directly with Gregorian chant. I did not buy the book or the CD at the time because I didn't have enough money. And now I'm regretting it because I can't seem to find it. So if you ever find it or see him, let me know. But he linked it very directly. What is figured bass and how does that relate to chords and inversions? And where do I come from here? It should be where do I go from here? This is why you shouldn't do things at 3 o'clock in the morning after you got back from a cruise. Okay. So we're going to talk about my friend Guido from the mob. No, not from the well. Guido and how we write music and why we write music the way that we do. And if you have any questions, I can't see everybody, so just unmute and say what your question is. So, okay. So this is Ariane Brown, and I have a funny story about this, who teaches her tricks of the trope. I don't know if you are familiar with this or not. Oh, you know what? I forgot to share share my audio. You couldn't hear that, right? No, okay, hold on, let me do that. Sorry. Let's try this again. There we go. Okay, there we go.
Here to teach you Torah trope in a way that's fast, fun, and easy to learn. In 3 lessons, you'll be able to sing all the Torah trope patterns. In lesson 1, we'll begin with the most common tropes that make up most of our sentences. We'll start with et nach ta phrases. Please listen, do what I do, and repeat after me. Mercha tipecha munach et nach ta.
So what she's doing is something that is hundreds of years old, and that is using your hands to relate to musical phrases or notes. And this is actually thousands of years old. There are pictures of from Egyptian iconography showing the conductor pointing to places on his hands or doing hand motions while people are playing. And so this is a very old technique. Now, this is Ariane's version of the trope hand motions. We're going to look at a different one in a minute. And the funny story I have about this is that about 10 years ago, this is how I learned to chant Torah, through her. And this is how I teach it, because I find that I'm a kinetic learner. And for kids, this is a great way to, they remember the symbols, they've got it. And so I've been using her YouTube videos for years. I was recently did a concert at Washington Hebrew. She's a cantor now at Addis Israel here in DC. And I went up to her, I'm like, hi, it's so nice to see you. And she looked at me and she's like, do I know you? And I realized that even though she's an Oi song artist, I had actually never met her in person, but I've watched her for so many years, I thought I met her before. So, but I very much recommend her Tricks of the Tropes for your students. They are great. But like I said, this is a very old technique. Let's see if I can get to the next, oops, not that one. Hold on, I need to get to the next guy. This is actually called chironomy, is actually the word for it. So if you're looking it up on the web, you may find more of this. And there are actually ones that are specific, that are much older, that are related to our trope symbols. And this is the guy who's going to be doing it for us a little bit. And well, I'll just let you see what he says.
באסיות ובפיום. המלמד קרא לפנינו את הפסוקים בניקוד ובטעמים כמובן בעל פה, ואחר כך סימן לנו את הטעמים בידיו. לשיטה זו קרא המלמד שיטת הטעמים בתנועות הידיים, והרי השיטה לפי הסימנים. מעריך טרחה אתנח, מעריך טרחה סוף פסוק, מהופך קדמה, זקף קטון, שופר רביע, אז לגריש, גריש, שני גרישים, זקף גדול, דרגה דביר, פזר גדול.
So anyway, you can find this, actually, this is on, I think it's on Josh Jacobson's website, or you can just look up chironomy and you'll find it there. He comes, that's like the first video that comes up. But like I said, this is very old. There are some books that also show this. I don't remember if I put that in or not. Let's see. Yeah, that. Next one. There we go. Yeah, so here's a book that actually does very similar, Mapak, Pashta, right? Zakef Gadol. So, old thing. So how does this relate to my friend Guido of the Mob? Well, he also came up with a similar system at about the same time, early medieval period. And he came up with what is called Guido's hand. And this is the way when you were doing one line of music, you could teach it to somebody. There was, ut, which becomes do, ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And by pointing to different places on his hand, he could teach the melody of the Gregorian chant to his students. And this is how we got those. And the reason why they are do, re, mi, fa, sol, la is it comes from a psalm, ut qui ad laxis, which is, and we sing, and the next line is like joyfully or whatever, but it's the first line of every, or the first word of every one is on a different note. So I'll show that to you. Here it is. So ut, which then becomes do because ut is really hard to sing. Re, so if this is a C major scale, ut is on C, re is on D, mi is on E, fa is on F, sol is on G, and la. And that's how we got those names, which are actually in most of the world what people use to call names of notes. They say we are in do. Well, then we're in the key of C. So if you ever see anything written in do major, that is the key of C. In other parts of the world, because of the different, especially when you get into places that have different alphabets. So like Japan or Russia, things like that, they will say it's in do or in re or in mi. So if you see that, that's what it is. It relates directly to CD, A, B, C, D. And it gets us to this too, right? Do a deer. And like I said, ut becomes do because for singers, trying to go is not pretty, and do is a better vowel to sing on than ut. So how does this lead to music notation? Well, our friend Guido the monk, the Benedictine monk, is the one who kind of started music notation. It began, like many of us teach our students when we do trope, as squiggles and dots above the actual letters. And this is an example of that. Squiggles and dots, you have no idea what it is. Some of it's higher and some of it's lower. And then somebody thought, and this is, I think next one is another one. Here's some more squiggles and dots. And somebody thought, I kind of want to have a signpost. I want to know where to go. So they put one line in. That one line often was C. And they would know, okay, well, anything that's on that line is C, and anything above it is above C, and anything below it is below C. And so then somebody said, yeah, but what are the ones above it? I don't know what the ones above it are. How am I going to know what that is? And so they kept adding line after line after line after line until they got to 4 lines. They thought 4 lines wasn't enough. They added 5, and they added 6, and they added 7, and they added 8, and they added 9, and they actually ended up with 11. And so the top here is actually 2 staves together, and that is 11 lines, which gives us our grand staff. So if you ever wondered why middle C is middle C, is because, let me get this, oops, I haven't got there yet. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to talk about this before I get to middle C. Okay, I must have missed one. Okay, so how do we know what line is what? This is where we get our clefs. Okay, so if you see here, this here is a G. So we know that line is G, and anything above it is above G, and anything below is below. This guy down here is our C. So we know that this line is C. So this is, I believe, alto clef. If you are ever reading an alto clef, it's on that line. I think that's alto. Nope, it's soprano. Soprano is C on the bottom. So nobody does that unless you're in music school and it's obnoxious. And so here's how we get to our C clef. We start with the letter C. It becomes a little bit more fanciful. Over the years, they start to block it in, to make it even better. They change it a little bit more. And then eventually this is what kind of a modern C clef looks like. C clef is used mostly for viola, and the cello sometimes will use it in the upper ranges. And sometimes Yeah, that's about it. That's pretty much, there are a couple other instruments that play in C clef, but not many anymore. The F clef is similar. It used to be a letter F. This is your bass clef if you're familiar with bass. I hate the term bass clef because yes, it tends to be those bass notes, but it has no, kids go, what the heck's a bass clef? You know, it's an F. It literally is the letter F. Started as a letter F and it becomes these little dots and they move it around. And then at some point they kind of flip it backwards and move it around again. And we get to kind of our modern F. So the dots encircle the F line. So this line in the middle of those dots will always be F. So if you just, and when with little kids, I draw the two lines and say, see, it's an F and the line in between is an F. And we have the same for our G clef. It became this, it moved into all different kinds of forms of the letter G. It was actually a really lovely G for a while, which is how we come to this G. And so the line in the middle is G. And it always G. So there is another soprano clef that you can sometimes see where it sits way low on the staff. It doesn't sit on G, it sits on basically what we think of as the E line. And that still is a G. It's always a G. Whatever falls in the middle of that is always a G. And just because I thought it was fascinating, here are how different composers do their G clefs, and they don't look right. Nobody has it. I love Beethoven's. He's like, I can't be bothered to do anything pretty. I'm just doing it how I feel and figure it out. But Schumann's a little bit more specific, and Debussy, Debussy and Ravel's kind of, Ravelli. So I thought that was funny. So what do we do with this information? I'm all about signposts, and this gives you a signpost so that you know that, like I said, this line in the middle is always G. You don't have to remember every good boy does fine and all that stuff. That always drove me bonkers. You can count up and down from G. You can count up and down from F. And eventually you'll just go, oh, that's a G. A, B, that's a B, and you just make those associations after a while. But if you start trying to memorize these mnemonics, they don't always work well for some people. And so same with our bass clef. So we know that if you drew your little line in there, this makes a pretty F. And so that line in there is F. It will always be F no matter where it goes. And this line is always G. It'll always be G no matter where it goes. And you count up and down the staff. A question I often get is, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Why don't we have H? And I actually don't know why. I do know that Bach wrote several pieces where he spells his name out, and he uses, just for the heck of it, B flat as H. So in many later composers will use a B flat and mark it as H. So if you ever see that, that's where that came from. It came from Bach, but it's not commonly used. Once in a while, you'll see it as something in the key of H in older music. So if you ever see anything in the key of H, it's B flat. So, which brings us back to our 11 line staff. So when they had those 11 lines, it's really hard to read 11 lines. So they took the middle one out, and that's how we get middle C. Is they just took that line out, made it a little bit bigger so that it wasn't quite, it wasn't quite so cramped, and gave us middle C. So actually there is, and I couldn't find it, but there is some keyboard music from around the, I want to say around the 15th or 16th century that is written in, it's like organ music or something like that, or like hurdy-gurdy music that is written on 11 lines. And it's incredibly difficult to read because it's 11 lines. So, but that's how we get middle C. They just gave it a little breathing space. So there's always that floating C line in there. All right, so we're gonna have a grace note of rhythm because I don't want to get into rhythm that much, but rhythm is just math. You have a whole note, which is a whole, right? It's a nice whole shape. You break it into two and you have two half notes. So if a whole note is worth 4 beats, a half note is worth 2 beats. Then you break that half note into 2 and you fill it in. Now you have quarter notes, which are worth 1 beat. Our eighth notes are half of that. It's just math. Then you have 16th notes, 32nd notes, 64th notes. It just adds on. Unless you're playing piano music or something with a lot of runs and trills, you'll probably never get past 16th notes. Most things don't go much past 16th notes. They bar them together just to make them easier to read, because once you get all those flags in there, they get difficult. But it's just math. So you just have to remember the whole note is always worth 4. Ever so often in 3/4 time, they will use a whole note, but it really shouldn't be. It should be a dotted half note. A dot next to a note gives it half the value, adds on half. So a dotted half note would be a half note, which is worth 2, plus half of that, which is 1. So it becomes 3. So that's how you get the dots in 3/4 or waltz music. But most of us are in 2/4 or 4/4. And so we are, we have our whole note, break it into 2 half notes, break it into smaller quarter notes, 8th and 16th notes. If you want more about that, I can add that into the next one, but I didn't know how much people wanted rhythm. But it's just math, which is why if you teach kids music quite young, they tend to be fairly good at math, because they get used to breaking things into smaller pieces. All right, well, I wanted to get into scales, modes, and nusach. So a scale is that ut, re, mi thing, right? We just talked about, and it's going to take us, if we think of ut as C, it's going to take us to C. Now I'm going to use a lot of piano here, so to help that, if you don't play piano, we're going to talk about piano for a minute. If you notice on the piano, you have groups of 3s and groups of 2s. So it goes 3, 2, and the black keys. Here you have a group of 3 and a group of 2 and a group of 3 and a group of 2. And it goes that way through the whole keyboard. So what I like to think of is that group of 2 here is my doghouse. And D is in the doghouse. So every group of 2, the middle guy in the doghouse is D. They're always D. And if I think of my 3 group here as a group of, as one entity, and I want him to stand up, he needs a foot. So I always think of him as an F. So this is my F, my foot of my 3 notes, 3 black notes, and he's an F. And so the foot of all 3 black notes will always be F. And once again, you have your guideposts, right? You know where D is. D is always in the doghouse of those 2 black notes. F is always the foot of those 3 black notes. And from there you can count. So from D, we're going to go to C. Now we know where C is. Every C. If this is C and this is D, next in the alphabet between D and F is E. And then we can go G, A, B. But D is the easiest. D is always in the doghouse. Poor dog. He's always in the doghouse. He never comes out. So that's a really good way of always finding your place on a keyboard and finding out where we are. So now we're going to talk a little bit about steps and intervals. As you can see, between E and F, there is no black note. And that's because there is no note in Western music, nothing in between E and F. They are always together, ever and forever. They are always together. And so so we know that there's going to be nothing in there. Whereas, and that's called a half step because there's nothing in between it. But if you look here between F and G, there is a black note. And that's a whole step. So a whole means that there's something in between, and a half means that they have nothing in between. So we have a half step always between E and F, and a half step always between B and C. And then between everybody else, we have a whole step. So that's the basic of whole steps and half steps. But now we're going to look at our major scale, because our C major scale, for anybody who's taken piano, are all the white notes, which makes it easy. So we have, and this is a pattern, and this is, I love this pattern. If you learn the pattern, you will always be able to make any major scale. So between C and D, we have a whole step because there's a note in between. Between D and E, there's a whole step because there's a note in between. Ever and forever, there's nothing in between E and F, so there's a half step. Between F and G, we once again have a whole step. Between G and A, note in between, is a whole step. Between A and B is a whole step. And between B and C is a half step. So this is our pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So if you just remember that, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half. I sing this all the time when I'm in the shower, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. I will always have my major scale. So how do we apply that? Let's look at G. We know we need to have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Between G and A is our whole step. We need a whole step between A and B. Okay, that works, whole, whole. Now we need a half step. That works, right? Because there's nothing in between B and C. There's our half step. Now we need our whole step between C and D. Great, that works. And now a whole step between D and E. That's perfect. Now what was that pattern again? Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. How are we gonna get a whole step? Because ever and forever, E and F are together. This is where we get sharps and flats. So flats go down like you have a flat on your car. Sharps go up because you've poked your finger and your hand goes up, right? If you poke your finger on a needle and you go, ow, your hand goes up, sharps are up, flats are down. There's F sharp because he's above F. It's also G flat, by the way. Same note. G flat goes down, F sharp goes up, and that gives us our whole step. Star, I love the look on your face. You're making me feel so good. Like I just like opened your world. So, and then we get our last final whole step between F sharp and G. And now we have our pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Let's try another one. In F, between F and G, I think I started it down here, did I? Yeah. Between F and G is our whole step. Right, whole, whole, half. Between G and A is a whole step. But if we do A and B, that's going to be a whole step. So we need a half step, right? Whole, whole, half. So it's got to be this guy. It's not going to be A sharp because we have A. So it's got to be a B something because they always have every letter of the alphabet there. So it's be a B something. And if you remember, we said flats are down, sharps are up. So we know it has to be a B. So we go to the black note under B and it's a B flat. There's our half step. Whole, whole, half. Now we need a whole step. Remember, a whole step has to have a note in between. That takes us to C. There's our whole step. So whole, whole, half between A and B flat. Between B flat and C is our whole step. Whole again, whole, ever and forever, half. And you can do this as long as you know whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half in any key. If you wanted to do it, for example, in, we'll just say an F sharp, not that you will ever need F sharp, but, and I didn't put this one in, but I'll just give it to you. F sharp to G sharp, whole, G sharp to A sharp, whole, half sharp half step to B. So F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B. Now we need another whole step, B to C sharp to D sharp, D sharp. Now we have to have a whole step. So F becomes E sharp, and then to F sharp. So you can do it in any key. Sometimes you gotta think about it hard and do a little extra math in your head, but as long as you have every single note letter, sometimes you'll have to use a sharp, but you can do it.
Emily, do you know how many years I spent memorizing this in music theory and never had this easy
Yep.
combination?
Yeah, whole, whole, half. That's all you need. And you can do anything. And I'll show you, you can get from there to anything from there. So what does this do with you? It can give you an understanding of whole and half steps, and it brings intervals into the picture too, and we're going to get to intervals in a bit. Through our understanding of the major scale, we now can understand modes and their application, and this directly relates to nusach, because nusach is just a mode that we use for our liturgical music. And your sight reading becomes stronger when you can understand where the halves and the wholes are. So what are modes? Modes are different scale structures. They are often based, in fact, almost completely based on the major scale pattern, but they are centered around a different starting pitch in that pattern. They were used extensively during the medieval period in Gregorian chant, which, like I said, I believe is where Gregorian chant really took from Jewish liturgical music. They were starting kind of at the same time as we were moving into the synagogue and starting to, and the Masoretes were putting the cantillation to the Torah, and we were starting to sing things, especially psalms. And the psalms that were being done in Judaism in those early synagogues are similar to what was being done in the same psalms in Gregorian chant. And so they are really very linked together. They were happening at the same time musically. And we know, Jews were living among Christians and Christians were living among Jews, and we borrowed from each other. And in Gregorian chant, the modes are used in different times of day. So there's like the Dorian mode is used in Vespers or whatever, there are different times of day, just like we have different nusach that we use at different times of day. They're just really related. And we see them a lot in jazz music, especially D Dorian. And like I said, many of our Ashkenazi nusach scales are built on it. I'm not so sure about Sephardic scales. I'm sure they are, but I know that definitely as we look at some Ashkenazi nusach that they are. So in the modes in C, so let's see if I put this here. Okay, let's see, maybe I can get myself in. No, let's see. Well, if you can hear it, I hope you can hear this. So C major, right? Major scale. Can you hear that or not? Is it fuzzy? They moved. There we go.
It's clear.
This.
It's clear.
Okay, so that's C. I'll turn it up a little bit. D Dorian, which is my favorite one. It sounds almost sounds kind of minor, but not quite. Phrygian. Lots of impressionistic music uses Phrygian. So if you are familiar with WCN Ravel, they loved Phrygian. Lydian. Mixolydian, which is just a major scale with a lowered seventh. Here's the one that is important, Aeolian, which you can always remember because it sounds like A minor, because it is A minor. And then Locrian, which nobody uses because it's just weird. Nobody uses it. These are Greek terms, and so Ionian is our major scale, and Aeolian is our what's called our natural minor scale. So there are three minors. There's natural, harmonic, and melodic. Natural is just the way God intended without any sharps and flats. Is the way I put it, or anything added on. So that's it. So natural minor, once again, it's going to have these steps. You don't have to memorize this one because if you know whole, whole, half, you write out your C major scale, start on A, and erase the rest. And you have your A minor. So, but I'll show it to you anyway. Whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. So it's, you know, a little different. You don't need to know that because the way I always taught my kids, when you're writing out a minor scale, write it out all the way in whatever major key it is. Go to the sixth step, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Erase all of that. Add a little bit up further, and you've got your minor scale because in natural minor. Now we're talking about these other minor scales, and I'm only going to touch on one today. And there's that G sharp, which is missing. Because if you know a minor scale, if you've done scales, right? If you did piano, that's what it was. Or it might be that's also the way you learn it. They like this G sharp, which is our leading tone. Have you ever heard that word, a leading tone? Because remember in our major scale, ho, ho, half, ho, 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 half. In our Western ear, we like that half note, that half step into the tonic, into the root. We like that sound. This sounds weird to our ear. We like, da, da. It sounds so, it sounds so nice and right. And so we've changed it in scale structures to give us a harmonic minor scale, which will give us that G sharp. So that's where that comes from. But that's how you get to our modes. Now, I want to relate this to Adonai Malach, which is the easiest one to do. The other ones are a little bit harder, but Adonai Malach is basically a major scale. Okay, so if we think about a major scale, if we're starting on C, this is Adonai Malach on C. Okay, a whole step, half, whole, whole. Now we need a whole step here to make it a major scale, but they've added a half. However, that's when you get above. Below, they kept it. So here it is. So if you think of this G here is the same as this G down here. Here's our middle C, by the way. C, B, A, G. This is, so basically, if this is middle C, this is the bottom line, this is the top line, excuse me, of your bass clef. If you're reading notes, just think of it that way. So this is the G below middle C. But here's our whole, whole, half. So we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So we have surrounding C, the end of our major scale here, and up to A is our major scale in Adonai Malach. So it's all major in the low part. And then when you want to go do some flourishes up at the top, they borrowed from minor, which now gives us this minor sound up here, whole, whole, half. So the bottom half of Adonai Malach is all major. So if you're going da da da, right? That's your major scale. It's, 5-1. It does a lot of 5-1. 5-1, 5-1. We do a lot of that in Adonai Malach. And then only when you want to get up into the flourishy stuff do we get that different sound. So this stuff gives it that kind of weird stuff that we sometimes get up here. But for the most part, we spend a lot of time down here in Adonai Malach. So you can see that if by knowing that major scale pattern and understanding it, it makes some of the nusach a little more sense. I mean, the problem with nusach is that it's jazz, right? It's jazz. If you're doing it the way like Arlene does it, oh my gosh, she is riffing a jazz riff in her nusach, like a jazz player would play in this scale. But if you're reading some nusach off of something that's composed, if you're reading Kachko or something, you can look at it and see these patterns now. You can see, oh, that's a major scale that he's using. That's a major thing. Okay, now I'm going to know, as long as I stay kind of majory, if I'm in Adonai Malach, I just have to stay major. So now where do I use Adonai Malach? I use it here or use it there, and I'm just going to stay major in my head. I'll come close. It's not going to be perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I know I can come close. So knowing the major scale pattern can help you figure out where the weirdness is or where the different kind of sounds are in nusach. It's really helpful. And so like I said, it's a major scale on the bottom and a natural minor scale at the top. All right, we're going to jump into intervals. We don't have much time. Between re and mi intervals. So your major scale, you have your intervals. Between C and D is a major second. Between C and E is a major third. Between C and F is a perfect fourth. Between C and G is a perfect fifth, and I'll talk to you why that this in a second. Between C and A is a major sixth. Between C and B is a major seventh, and between C and C is a perfect octave. So, if you're looking at your major scale, you will always find your major intervals. Okay? It will always give you your major intervals. Why is there perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and perfect octave? Except in our equal temperament tuning. In every other tuning way of tuning, because there are all these different ways of how many pieces are in between for tunings. Like if you're doing like a Phrygian tuning, the fourth and the fifth and the octave are the most perfectly matched intervals. So if you've ever sung with somebody and they're singing a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth above you, and you can hear them beating, those like beats, have you ever heard that? There are two it's almost like the sound beats. And if you haven't, the next time we're at conference, we'll do it. You'll hear these little beats. That's because you've hit it right on, and that they're beating together. The wave signals are beating together, and that's what gives you those beats. And that's why they're perfect. They're the most equal distance of the intervals, so that they are the perfect ones. So what does this look like on our piano? Here's our major second. It's going to have a note in between. It's a whole step. A major second is a whole step. Okay? So if you always think of a major second as a whole step, a minor second is a half step. A major second is a whole step. A major third is going to be the distance from C to E. So that is 2 whole steps. Okay? A perfect fourth is going to add that C to F. So now you've got 2 whole steps and a half step, right? Whole, half. Perfect fifth, C to G. That's that whole, half. Whole. So you've got, what is that? 3 whole steps and a half step. A is a major sixth. I always remember major sixth to sing it because it's the beginning of NBC. So ba ba, or My Bonnie Lies Over Ocean is always a major sixth. Major seventh is to B. That's that jazz chord that you get sometimes. That's that sound with that seventh in there. And then the octave. This is a great site. It's great for working on your ear. It gives you all of the intervals, and they also do descending and songs that go with them. So unison, happy, right? Happy birthday, happy, that's your unison. Minor second is, let's see, da-da. That's the one I always remember. Right? Frere Jacques is your major second. Major third. Whatever it is, I can't remember how to play Axel F anymore. I used to know how to do that one. Major, that's minor, sorry. That's why. That's right, it has some minors in here. So that's minor third, major third, right? Fourth, this is the one I use the most, especially in nusach, right? Which I always know is Here Comes the Bride, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for Jewish music, but sure, why not? That's how I always hear it in my head. That tritone, which is Maria, Maria, da, 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 da. Fifth, are you going to Scarborough Fair? I will always hear this as NBC, which also helps me with a chord. Our major sixth. Or My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. And then major seventh. Oh, sorry, wrong. There it is. Minor seventh. There's minor seventh. Star Trek. Major seventh is, I always hear it pulling to the C, and our octave. Look at this. It will help, if you can come up with those intervals, it will help your sight reading go leaps and bounds. So now we are very quickly into chords, and I'll just start a little bit, and we're going to start with figured bass. If you don't know figured bass, open some Bach. Figured bass were the chord symbols of Bach's time. So I had to learn figured bass not only because I was in music school, but because I was a harpsichordist. And what they would give you is a bass line and this underneath. And you had to be able to play it at sight, an accompaniment. So it's like reading chords, but reading figured bass. And what does it give you? It gives you the chord information. The one is the one chord, the C chord here. 4, so 1, 4, 5. If you hear that, like, oh, all the Beatles music is written in 1, 4, 5. Okay, that's 1 C, a C chord, an F chord, right, which is 4, C, D, E, F, 4, right, and G is the 5 chord. So what they're talking about is that 1, 4, 5 are the chords based in C major or D major, whatever major, on that major scale, which is where that whole half comes back in, right? You will always be able to find 1, 4, 5. 1, and then it always goes back down, right? What are these other notes? Here's a 6. That's your A minor. That's the 6th spot in C. A 2 is a D minor, and they're little because they're minors. Majors are in big letters, minors are in small letters. So we have here, let's see, that's a minor chord, right? So what does that mean? So let's start with our one chord, which is also known as a 5-3. Where does that 5-3 come from? It's our intervals. We have a third here between C and E, and between C and G, we have a 5. So a root chord is also known as a 5-3 chord. So if we're doing 1, 2, 3 between C and G, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 between C and G. And that gives us our root position chord. That makes sense? So in root position, your chords in a 5-3 pattern will always be all lines or all spaces. So root position chords will be all lines or all spaces. So if you see a chord that looks like this, you could say, oh, it's all lines, it's a root position chord. Now I just have to figure out what that bottom note is. Okay, that bottom note is an E. It's an E chord of something. You don't even have to know whether it's major or minor, but you'll know it's an E something. All right, it's an E chord. F, all spaces. I just need to know that it is an F, and this is a root position F chord. And here are those letters again. 1 major chord, 2 minor chord, 3, so 1 major chord, 2 minor chord, 3 minor chord, 4 is a major chord, 5 is a major chord, 6 is a minor chord, and 7 is a diminished, which we don't use too often, but sometimes in jazz and in modern music they like a good diminished chord. So that is the chords there. So what are inversions in 2 minutes or less? I will go back and redo this later. Inversions are chords which the order is flipped. So if this is our root major chord, this is first inversion. You take that C, you jump it on top. So it's here, that's root position. That is our first inversion. The C is up here now. Okay? And they will always be line, line, space, or space, space, line. That's how inversions go. It's always line, line, space, or space, space, line. So an inversion, it's not as stable. If you were going to write music and you're going to write everything in inversions, it's not going to sound grounded because you need that to make it sound grounded. But if you're passing through, an inversion's a great thing to use. And that's first inversion. If there's first inversion, what do you think second inversion is? You take the E and pulse it up top. And that's second inversion. Now this one sounds even less grounded. There's your C. Because this is what's at the bottom. That doesn't sound like that. Now it does sound like you're going to go, right? Because that 5's there. And in Western music, we love 5-1. We love 5-1 because it sounds very final. Most music ends on 5-1. 5-1. But this is our inversion, our second inversion. So what are the intervals in each chord? Here we have 5 and 3. So 3 in the bottom, see it's written the way it is. 3 on the bottom and 5 on the top. This is called a 6-3. 6 on the top and 3 on the bottom. So if you ever see in your music and somebody has written a C6 chord, what does that mean? It means it's in first inversion, is what it means. They want it in first inversion. And a 6-4 is a 4 here on the bottom and a 6 on the top. So when we come back now, you can see here's our root chord, our root 1 chord. We know because it's got C at the bottom. Here's another root chord. This is a 1/6. So we said that 1/6 is that first inversion. So there's an E on the bottom. And we have another one here. Here's that 4. It's in root position because there's no numbers. And 4, C, D, E, F is F. F is on the bottom. Here's a 5. Now this 8 here, just so you know, we'll never see it very often, is saying that they want it to move from 8 to 7. They wanted a melody note here that's going to move from 8 to 7. So here's 8, right? There's a G because it's G is the bottom. G moving to F so that you can get here. So you can go. So we get that feel of, that's what that is. It doesn't happen that much, only in some Bach stuff. Here's our root position 6 chord. A is on the bottom. And that's it. So now you might be able to sit down and write this in because you know that here is C. It's going to be a root position. So you know for C, you need C, E, and G. So you write an E in here and a G in there. And another C maybe. Here's 6/5. So we know that they want a C in this one. So it's going to clash with that D. But they want a C in here. And they want a 6, which is a D. So we've got our D. Somewhere I'm going to write a C in there. And then I'm going to put an A in somewhere. Here's a root position G chord. So I'll have a B in there somewhere. And back to C. C, E, G. So that's basic figured bass where we get our chords from. It all comes from Bach and what Bach did with the chorales. So if you ever sing any Bach chorales, that's what this is. It's all figured bass exercises. So where do you go from here? Alfred's Essentials of Music Theory book is my favorite book to teach out of. It's clean, it's clear, it's concise. It's 3 volumes. You can buy it complete, or if you've got basic note reading stuff down, start in the second book. It's great for kids. It's not super uber friendly kids, but if you've got like teenagers, start them here. This is the book. I love this book. It is just really, really simple and clean, and it doesn't do anything more than you need to know. And it will touch on figured bass and all that. Yeah.
Emily, I just saw that somebody has to leave. I just want to make sure that if anybody has questions for you,
That's
because
it. This is where I'm at.
chock full of information that it's so important that, you know, if anybody has questions, please unmute and let's talk.
Yes, I was done. That was my last bit. So
I was wondering, would you say that the Jewish modes are closer to Western music or Eastern music?
I would actually say Western because, and this is why, is that when you start getting into Eastern music, you start getting into microtones. And we don't have a lot of microtonal music written microtonal in Ashkenazi nusach. So now when you get into like more Sephardic nusach, you get into microtonal. So I would say the Sephardic nusach, especially with some of their the quavering in Sephardic, and some of like, especially when you get into like more Mizrahi, like Iranian and things like that, right? When you get into that side of that type of music, then you're getting into microtonals. But if we're talking about Ashkenaz nusach, they really made that fit into Western music notation. So it really depends on where you are. Yeah. Any other questions?
Eileen wrote a question saying, so in guitar, when we see an E minor 7, is that actually an inversion?
It is. It depends on, well, no, not really. I mean, unless, because it's adding a 7th.
Right.
So that 7 is actually, which we'll get into in the next class, which is in April, I think, when we start to talk about 7th chords. So the 7 is actually saying add that 7th step in there. And they usually mean a flat 7 in chords and not a major 7. If it's a major 7, it'll say an M, like a big M7 or something. So they want a flat 7 in there, which is that kind of what you get with a that sound, not this, but that sound.
And Bertie had asked, cellists call that C clef tenor. And why did they call it tenor?
So because of where it sits in the staff. So the C clef is the one that's the most movable in our modern last 1,500 years. In our modern music notation, the one that remains movable is the C clef. So depending on where it's placed, it becomes soprano, alto, tenor, or bass. And for cellists, it sits in the tenor space.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. That's probably why I love cello so much. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions before we have to say goodbye to each other?
Can I just say, I've been playing music for over 65 years. I'm in my 70s. I've never heard anyone as clear and as simple as what you just said. I mean, it would have made my whole musical life so much easier. I'm still playing in an orchestra, and I'm just
and can we
say that I haven't known this for 70 years.
Yeah.
And can we have a
music
class
education
that,
is really bad.
and can we have a class that shows us how to do those slides with the different layers that you did? I mean, I don't even know what, I have no words left. And for me, that's something. Wow.
This was fantastic. I thank you so much.
I'm so glad. I hope you guys learned something, because I know Barb knows a ton of stuff, so I was a little worried that Barb was there. Or Robbie. You guys write music all the time.
I know stuff, but not formal stuff. And this was wonderful.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. So the next class that we do is going to move on. We'll talk about inversions and chords again. We'll add in 7th chords and talk about borrowing chords as well. So what does that mean to borrow chords and how we use that? So, and I think that's in April.
Wonderful.
Awesome, Emily. So fabulous. Thank you so much.
So glad. So
I agree with
I'm going to stop the recording now. Is that okay? Okay.